I've had the privilege of wearing dog tags for almost 40 years now. And when I went in 1979 to the Armor Officer Basic Course in Fort Knox, Kentucky, females being in combat arms was, none of us would ever thought that would have happened. But times have changed, and it's changed for the good. 2 years ago, the 181 HIMARS Battalion fired rockets in Estonia, the first time rockets had ever been fired in that country since 1939 on the Germans firebombing. And the battery commander fired the first round, and she was a female battery commander. So when Congress and the Army opened up combat arms to females, I think we kind of had a tactical pause and was like, how are we going to find those folks to serve in that? How are we going to support it? But surprisingly enough, they came forward, stood up and said, send me, I want to go. And I wanted today to ask one of my lieutenants, the Tennessee National Guard, who just completed the Armor Officer Basic Course. Second Lieutenant Alyssa Vasquez, she works as an officer strength manager in my recruiting battalion in Tennessee. She joined the Guard in 2002. She served 2 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she served as a personnel strength manager. In one of her tours, she was a casualty liaison in NGAUS. She came back home and she attended our state OCS Academy and was commissioned, but she deferred her commission until 2017 to maintain her position working with our recruiting and retention battalion. And this year, after she was commissioned, Lieutenant Vasquez completed the Armor Officer Leaders Course at Fort Benning, Georgia. She currently still serves as our strength manager, and she does a wonderful job. And also, she went to the largest undergraduate school in Tennessee, my alma mater, Middle Tennessee State University. So she has numerous awards. She served with distinction, and it's my privilege to introduce to you today Lieutenant Vasquez.
As you all are aware, armored officers don't have to be very tall. I first want to thank General Hastings for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't very familiar with what NGAUS actually was, and this experience has been phenomenal, but I'm going to tell you how I figured out what it was. So, I was contacted by the General's aide who asked me if I had a few moments to speak with the tag. How many lieutenants say no to that? And of course I said, sure, absolutely. And shortly discovered he'd like for me to speak at NGAUS. General Hastings called me in his office and he said, "Are you sure you're up for this?" And he took a second and paused, and in his very southern accent said, "Because if someone had told me as a second lieutenant that I'd be speaking at NGAUS, I probably would have puddled in my pants." So in my 15 years of military experience, I never imagined speaking in a room full of higher-ranking officers than me. As you can imagine the size of my second lieutenant eyes, like large saucers, I of course responded without completely understanding the full concept of the mission and said absolutely. So here I am. I'm Second Lieutenant Alyssa Vasquez. I was born in San Bernardino, California, to 2 very ingenuitive hippies. We lived in a 1951 Greyhound bus that my parents had transformed into a home by removing the seats and building papier-mâché walls and repurposing any form of material that we could. My first bed was a watermelon crate that hung from a spindle and dangled from the luggage compartment. I learned how to walk in the recessed walkway and remember the feeling of pulling the handle to the swinging door open in the morning. Needless to say, we were very poor, but innovative. My parents were never married, and my mother's family was from Tennessee. So as I got older, she decided to follow her parents and raise us in a smaller area. So we moved to Nashville when I was about 13. Talk about shell shock. I went from a middle school with about 5,000 students in it to a middle school called DuPont Hadley with about 300 students in it. Nonetheless, it was the best thing my mother ever did. I was an avid athlete. I played played soccer, I was in the band, I sometimes made the honor roll. I was a junior ROTC cadet and found interest in the military, so I joined the Tennessee Army National Guard the day after I turned 17 as a senior in high school. My recruiter asked me what I wanted to do, and I responded, "What can I do?" I didn't know that there were even jobs in the military. I just knew I wanted to serve. So looking back, I'll have to say this after most of my career being in recruiting, that he was a good recruiter. But the point is, I didn't know. I wanted to be strong and fast, and I liked the idea of serving in any capacity that kept me close to my family. So lo and behold, I was a human resources specialist. It was a job, not very exciting, but a job that led to a full-time position as a recruiter. I was a young recruiter in the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars from 2004 to 2008, and the other NCOs in my office had deployments and troop leading procedures under their belts. I had recruiting. I was starting to feel an itch, and I resigned my recruiting position for a civilian job as a contractor, working for IO Studio. I was still assisting the Guard with strength, but on a civilian level, and the benefit was I was able to be MBA. I went on 2 deployments during that time, and I learned very valuable lessons in leadership that led me to want to commission and eventually wish to become a maneuver officer in the Armored Corps. I wanted to be an armor officer for several reasons. One, I felt like it was a missed opportunity as a younger soldier. I can remember being 4 or 5 years old, watching my grandparents turn dial television and seeing my first Army commercial. There were men crawling through the mud, hopping over walls, and jumping out of airplanes. My heart was racing with excitement. And I said aloud, "I want to be in the Army," to which my very traditional Hispanic grandmother replied, "No, mija, that's just for boys." I was always an outdoors kid, and my stepbrothers and I spent summers climbing trees and stealing my grandpa's tools to make forts. We rode bikes and played on baseball diamonds and makeshift dirt patch fields. To which my grandmother would again say, "You're a girl. You're not supposed to get so dirty." Dirty was the after effect of my competitive and tough nature. If scoring a game-winning point meant getting dirty by scraping my knees and sliding into home on our dirt patch baseball field, I was going to slide into home. Armor school was something that felt very much the same way to me as sliding for a game-winning kick or a goal. It was something I needed to do, even if I got dirty. I had learned about the ins and outs of the as I realized I was getting into armor school, I wanted to start preparing for the mental games of combat arms. And as soon as I heard I was approved through the Leaders First program to go to Fort Benning, I started to do research on what armor school consisted of. I learned about the ins and outs of the high physical demands test, which consisted of a lot of upper body strength, posterior train movement, and core mobility, as well as endurance in the form of ruck marches and long distance running. I inquired about the Ranger PFT and the type of PT I would be doing. I immediately realized that the PT program of running 2 miles and doing push-ups and sit-ups, though I usually score above a 285 in my age gender group, was not going to meet the physical demands of a Bullock. I began doing research on functional movement, weightlifting, HIIT training, which led me to the world of CrossFit. I had only 2.5 months of solid time to dedicate before I reported to Bullock, so I began a rigorous plan of CrossFit in the morning and rucking 2 to 3 days per week in the afternoons. Upon reporting, I feared being physically inferior and less tactically inclined as my counterparts, was only proved to be moderately factual regarding physical inferiority. I never came in last, and not always being first has always pushed me to work harder. But the point is, it's accomplishable. If a 32-year-old soldier who's had 15 years of prior service, whose body has endured deployments and more age than the majority of my peers can make it through a Bullock, it's absolutely achievable. Notice I said the word soldier, not female. I'll admit that I had concerns about gender before I arrived at Fort Benning, and I was amazed at how much of a non-issue it actually was. We of course had the in-brief about gender integration, and there were a few murmurs in the room. But as the course went on, we were focused on accomplishing the daunting tasks before us, and we weren't worried about gender. We had 5 consecutive weeks in the field. In the field, we were mixed in, slept with our crewmates inside of vehicles, used the same tree lines, and somehow managed to make it through without an incident. However, it was a controlled environment where all of us were on a similar playing field and intentionally focused on graduating. Not everyone did graduate. We lost about 12 to either physical fitness, academic failure, or injury. But nonetheless, I say all this to say that sometimes things are a big deal if we make them a big deal. So making the mission a big deal and enforcing rigorous and degraded training standards allowed the leaders the freedom to execute the mission, and it fostered a healthy work environment. I once had an encounter with a Sergeant First Class in Master Gunner School with about 20 years of service go through a barrage of irritations about females being on a tank, and how females were going to ruin the integrity of combat arms. I asked him what his biggest issue was. His reply, "Where are you going to use the bathroom?" I said, "Where do you go to the bathroom?" Of course, the conversation was a little more colorful and crass, but the gist is, we went in the same place. It blew his mind that I didn't require a shower curtain hung over the bustle rack and a fancy porcelain seat hitched off the sprocket. Either way, by the end of the night, he realized I was like him, a soldier. My point is, change doesn't happen by producing regulation and guidance. Sometimes it happens when people feel familiar with difference. The saying, "We're more alike than we believe we are," stands true, even in combat arms. And it's safe to say that people naturally resist change to systems that they find working. The old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not going to say combat arms was broken, because it obviously wasn't. America's been winning wars since the Revolution. What I will say is it's been winning wars with women in combat for many more years than what the 2020 Project gives credit for. Over 16 women died in direct combat action in World War II. Women were on the front lines in Desert Storm, fought along with Special Forces units as PSYOPs in Afghanistan, led infantry companies without being infantry branch qualified during the Iraq War. I'm telling y'all, females in combat arms is not new. Females being permanently integrated into units that are trained to kill the enemies of our nation is new. My advice to my female comrades is to not be afraid of failure. If you were born to lead, your leadership will prevail in training. I'd advise anyone, but especially the females, to get into a HIT physical training program if you're not already. And if you're not already, start reaching for the 18-year-old male standards on the current APFT. The new one will be much harder. Also, be prepared to work. Combat arms is not the place for chivalry. If it's heavy, pick it up. We were soldiers before we were females. To our leadership, I understand your need to fill our ranks, and having females open doors for younger soldiers is a priority. I'd ask that you're careful with how you show your pride. It's very easy for soldiers to make assumptions that she's only receiving this position because she's a female. And due to the timing of this, we're fighting an uphill battle to blend in. Do for us as you would do for a male, and I promise you we will earn our place. In closing, combat arms is not for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart. The direction of our country is moving, and as history repeats itself, ground warfare involving maneuver forces is alive and well with our adversaries. In order to combat our enemy's strength, we have to be a united front of uniformed personnel, striving to reach the same goals. And that's in defense of this great nation and the American people. Thank you all, New Orleans, for hosting this, and thank you again to General Haston for allowing me to speak today.
Wow. Put a tiger in your tank with you. What a class act. I'll serve with her anything. What's your
Being
connection?
a brave soldier she is, she said she would entertain
Really?
questions, so if anybody's got any questions, please come up to the microphone.
Man, what a... I am impressed. Oh, geez.
Okay, all right, he's right there, okay, I'll say.
She's still
Good morning, sir, ma'am. As everybody knows, tomorrow is Army National Guard Women Equality Day. So it's because of leadership like you, ma'am, people previous to you who serve our nation in uniform and the ones who come after you. We honor you and all those again, thank you for your leadership and you taking the initiative to move out, doing something totally different, and also represent women of our nation in our uniform. Cool?
Thank you so much, sir.
Wow. This lady is gonna be a general. Damn.
Okay, as we come to the close of our Army separate session, I want to thank everybody for being here.